They had rehearsed the operation for months, drilling the compound's layout until their movements became instinct, building full-scale replicas in hangars no one would ever see, running simulations for every possible failure except the one that truly mattered. They studied air density, heat signatures, dog behavior, guard rotations, electrical patterns, even the sound of wind between the alleyways of a butt. Everything had been reduced to prediction and muscle memory. Everything except the moment that would come to haunt the mission forever. A moment so brief, so fragile, that it almost tore the entire operation open. It happened at exactly 0:23 local time. The first modified Black Hawk slipped across the Pakistan border and descended into the quiet neighborhood where the world's most wanted man was hiding. The air was unnaturally still. So still the rotor wash barely touched the dust drifting along the street. Inside the cockpit, Reaper 1, a pilot who had flown through Afghanistan's worst ambush corridors and Iraq's deadliest valleys, felt something he had never felt. The sky was too calm, too heavy, as if the atmosphere itself were waiting. The SEALs in the cabin said nothing. They were not tense. They were not scared. They were silent in the way only men who have already accepted the price of the next hour can be. The mission was a ghost, and ghosts do not speak. Then, without warning, the helicopter flickered. A tremor rolled through the avionics. A pulse of interference cut through the electrical system, and for exactly 3 seconds, the Black Hawk became visible. The screens blinked out in perfect unison. A blackout so complete it felt like the machine had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. In those 3 seconds, the stealth rotor software froze. The altitude reference died. Every countermeasure system went offline. For 3 seconds, the Black Hawk wasn't a ghost anymore. It was loud, heavy, and fully detectable to anyone awake within a 1-mile radius. The pilot's blood chilled instantly. He tapped the navigation display, then the countermeasure panel, thinking for a moment that it was a mechanical anomaly. But machines do not make mistakes that line up with external events, and outside the cockpit window, a strange reflection caught his eye. 2 streets away, a window lit up. Then another. Then another. Abbottabad, a neighborhood that had been in a blackout for hours, suddenly surged with electricity, lighting up block by block as if someone had flipped a master switch. The helicopter was now flying through a neighborhood that had just woken from the dead, and no one inside the cabin could understand why. 3 seconds earlier, the city had been dark. 3 seconds later, the entire neighborhood could hear the helicopter. One of the SEALs whispered, "We're hot." Another clicked his weapon from safe to semi. Another simply lowered his head, steadying his breathing. The pilot's voice came out tight. "We've been visible for 3 seconds." The SEAL commander leaned forward from the jump seat, eyes hard behind the NVGs. "Visible to who?" "I don't know," the pilot answered, but someone woke up. Outside, the stillness of the neighborhood shattered. A dog barked. Another barked back. Then, an entire alley erupted into frantic sound dogs, metal gates. A woman shouting somewhere behind a courtyard wall. The kind of chain reaction that only happens when something unnatural passes overhead. And then it happened the moment that almost destroyed the mission. A man stepped out onto a balcony, just beyond the compound. Barefoot, still half asleep, wearing a white undershirt. Holding a phone, he lifted it toward the sky with the instinctive curiosity of someone who, Dawson T, understand what he is hearing, but knows it shouldn't T be there. His camera glowed in the darkness, ready to record, ready to upload, ready to blow the operation open before it even began. Inside the helicopter, no one breathed. Later, analysts would write reports insisting it was coincidence, a local technician restoring power, a tripped breaker activating the grid, nothing more. But the men in the helicopter knew better. 3 seconds of system failure did not align accidentally with a neighborhood awakening from blackout. Something external interfered. Something triggered the surge. Something warned that man to step outside. Something woke him. The operation continued. The mission went on. The world knows how it ended. But what the world never knew was that before the breach, before the firefight, before the final shot, on the 3rd floor, before the crash inside the courtyard, 3 seconds almost changed history. 3 seconds almost exposed everything. 3 seconds almost killed the mission before it began. And those 3 seconds were the mistake no one was ever allowed to speak of. The helicopter drifted toward the compound, but every man inside understood that the mission had already changed. The target was still ahead. The objectives still intact. The timeline still in motion, but something intangible had shifted in the dark. The 3-second blackout had not only made them visible for a breath of time, it had awakened something in the neighborhood, a ripple of awareness that spread like electricity jumping across dry air. And standing at the center of that ripple was the man on the balcony. He wasn't supposed to be awake. According to intel, the entire neighborhood followed a predictable rhythm: early dinners, long blackout-induced silence, sleep in humid rooms, made sluggish by heat. But there he stood, barefoot, blinking at the sky, illuminated by the weak glow of a resurrected power grid, his phone raised toward the noise he didn't yet understand. In the cabin, the SEAL commander watched him through the open door, night vision optics turning the man's outline into a bright green silhouette. "That's a problem," he murmured, his voice a low current running beneath the engine noise. The pilot didn't respond. He couldn't afford distraction. The helicopter was losing altitude fast, the stealth-modified rotors struggling to stabilize after the interference spike. Every micro-adjustment became a knife-edge decision. Too much lift, and they'd hit the wall. Too little, and they'd drop like a stone. The blackout had corrupted more than the avionics. It had shaken the aircraft's confidence, and with it, the pilot's instinct. But the commander was focused elsewhere. The man on the balcony had stepped forward, resting his forearms on the railing, phone tripod still in his hand. The screen glowed brighter. A recording. Maybe a live stream. Maybe a message to someone else in the house. Eyes on left side balcony. One SEAL whispered, his voice calm but coiled with alarm. "What do you want to do?" another asked. The commander didn't answer immediately. He weighed the consequences in silence. A civilian recording a mystery aircraft at midnight in a Pakistani military town would, sooner or later, upload what he saw. That video would circle the internet. It would hit servers in Karachi, then Islamabad, then Washington. Pakistan's military would mobilize. Their radar systems were already twitching in the dark, registering signatures they hadn't fully identified. The entire operation depended on the cover of silence. That man, half asleep, barefoot, unaware, was now the single greatest threat to the mission. The helicopter drifted closer. The man leaned further over the railing. 3 seconds had awakened him. One more second could expose them. "Commander," a SEAL whispered, "say the word." But the word did not come easily. This wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a desert. It wasn't a compound housing armed guards. This was a civilian in his own home, living his ordinary life in the wrong place at the wrong time. The road didn't allow lethal action against non-combatants unless there was an imminent threat, but what counted as imminent when the entire operation risked unraveling over a phone camera. And then the man lifted the phone even higher, the lens catching a faint glimmer of the helicopter's moving shadow. The commander exhaled slowly. "We can't risk it." One of the SEALs shifted, raising the suppressed rifle tucked close to his chest. He placed his cheek against the stock and drew a bead on the balcony. The reticle settled on the man's sternum, but before the shot could be considered, the helicopter lurched violently as the pilot fought the dying airflow. The sudden jolt caused the man on the balcony to flinch and look toward the compound instead, and for the briefest moment, the commander saw something in his posture. Not fear, recognition. As if he hadn't just heard the helicopter, but expected it. It lasted a fraction of a second, the kind of detail the brain tries to dismiss in the heat of urgency. But the commander saw it clearly. The man wasn't confused, wasn't startled. He was searching, scanning, looking for something specific. He lowered the phone and stepped back inside, who's-like.com/controlled, unhurried, and that unsettled the commander more than if the man had shouted, or dropped the phone, or run inside screaming. What the hell was that? "One," SEAL muttered. "Nobody turns the power back on at midnight for no reason," another said. The commander stared at the now empty balcony. Someone tipped him off. The idea spread through the cabin like cold water down the spine. Someone had alerted him. Someone who knew the mission. Someone inside Abbottabad, or worse, inside their own periphery. The helicopter descended toward the compound's outer wall, the infamous wall that would soon swallow the bird whole. But the commander's mind was still on the balcony, on the man whose appearance aligned too perfectly with the blackout, the power surge, the interference, and the 3-second window that had stripped their stealth away. "Eyes sharp," he ordered. "There's more happening tonight than we were told." The SEALs nodded silently, and as the ground rushed up to meet them, and the operation crossed the threshold from secrecy to inevitability, one truth carved itself into their minds. The 3-second mistake had not been an accident. It had been a signal. Someone else was watching the operation unfold. Someone inside the city. Someone who should not have known they were coming, and the man on the balcony was only the first sign. The helicopter dipped lower, the compound rising beneath them like a concrete island in a black sea. The walls were tall, uneven, imperfect, built by hands that had money, secrecy, and paranoia in equal measure. As the bird descended, the commander felt that same weight in the air, the same pressure he had sensed on the balcony moments earlier. Something was happening in Abbottabad beyond the scope of their intelligence packets. Something invisible that threaded itself through the quiet streets like a current beneath still water. The men prepared to fast rope. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Every movement was second nature. But beneath their practiced rhythm sat a new tension, a quiet question none of them dared to voice. Who knew they were coming? Because someone did. And that realization colored the compound in a new shade of danger, turning every shadow into a possibility, every window into a threat. As the helicopter reached the perfect insertion height, the air suddenly shifted again, a distortion, a pocket of unexpected turbulence spiraling upward from the compound's courtyard. The pilot reacted instantly, but the airflow was too erratic, too heavy. The modified Black Hawk bucked like a living thing struck in the ribs. Inside the cabin, the SEALs braced. The commander held onto the frame. The pilot's voice cracked through the coms. "We're losing lift." What happened next would be written into history as a mechanical failure, a vortex ring state, a textbook accident. But the men inside the helicopter felt the truth. The air shouldn't have collapsed like that. Not naturally, not at that altitude, not in those conditions. Something manipulated the flow. The helicopter slammed into the courtyard wall with a bone-shaking crash, slicing through the plastered brick before rolling onto its side. Dust erupted like a bomb blast. Metal screamed against metal. The cabin filled with choking debris, and yet, remarkably, almost impossibly, everyone survived. The SEALs kicked their way out of the downed aircraft, emerging into the courtyard gasping, coughing, but alive. They formed a perimeter instantly, weapons raised, eyes scanning the compound interior. The commander wiped blood from his nose and glanced at the wall they had struck. Embedded in the brick, half crushed by the impact, was something that didn't belong. A small box the size of a paperback book, wired to what looked like a crude battery pack. But it wasn't crude at all. Ortiz reached it first, crouching beside the fractured device. "Sir," he called, his voice low, "you need to see this." The commander knelt. The box was scorched, dented, almost unrecognizable, but the pieces that mattered were still intact. A miniature transmitter, a frequency modulator, and beneath it, a copper coil, wound with mathematical precision. It was designed to interfere with flight systems, not enough to bring down a helicopter outright. Just enough to destabilize it, just enough to make it drift off balance, just enough to force a crash inside the compound instead of outside it. "This wasn't placed by accident," Ortiz murmured. "No," the commander replied, the truth settling in his gut like ice. "Someone installed this to make sure we didn't land clean." But who? They didn't have time to wonder. From inside the house came a sound. Not shouting, not panic, but a heavy wooden thud, like something large being slammed shut. The team stacked on the door. The commander took point. The carpenter's dowel lock splintered under the breaching charge, and the SEALs flooded into the dark hallway with the smooth precision of a blade sliding into its sheath. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else. Tension. expectation, a presence that felt too aware of them. They moved room to room, clearing corners, checking every doorway, every blind spot. It was almost quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels arranged rather than natural. Then they found the first anomaly, a closed office door that didn't match the architecture. Heavy, reinforced, modern hinges on old plaster. The commander signaled 2 men positioned breaching charges. The blast shook the hallway, and the SEALs surged inside. What they found was not a study, not a bedroom, not a storage room. It was a monitoring station. Screens, cables, power supplies, humming with stored energy, a rack of hard drives. A thermal camera feed pointed directly at the courtyard, and on the desk, dust-covered but powered, a laptop still warm under the palm rest. Ortiz moved toward it like a man approaching a mine. "This isn't theirs," he whispered. "This tech is too clean. Too recent." The commander studied the room. It wasn't Pakistani intelligence. It wasn't local law enforcement. It was something else. A shadow system built inside the compound without the residents' knowledge. Someone had been watching the house from inside the house. Someone had been intercepting signals. Someone had been monitoring the city grid. Someone had been waiting for that blackout. And someone had been ready to interfere with the helicopter the moment they arrived. A faint electronic chirp drew their attention to the laptop. Ortiz froze. "That sound? That's a triggered alert." "What kind of alert?" the commander asked. Ortiz swallowed. "A proximity alert." "For us?" Dawson asked. "No," Ortiz said, hands shaking as he traced the scroll of data blinking on the screen. "This alert wasn't set to trigger when we entered the house. It was set to trigger when we entered Pakistani airspace." The room went still. Someone inside the compound had known they were coming hours before the first helicopter crossed the border, and that someone had installed the device that destabilized the aircraft, and that someone had forced the crash. The commander closed the laptop and exhaled. "This isn't a target house," he said. "It's a trap. And somewhere in the compound, in one of the dark rooms, the SEALs had not yet reached. Someone was waiting. Someone who understood the mission better than they did. Someone who had planned for this moment. Someone who wanted the world to see the 3-second mistake." The SEALs moved deeper into the compound, their boots gliding across uneven marble tiles that were strangely warm underfoot, as if the entire structure had been holding its breath for years and was now releasing. In the presence of armed intruders, the house was too quiet. Unnervingly quiet. Almost staggered. They had been inside dozens of high-value compounds before. Compounds filled with shouting, scrambling, movement, fear, but this one felt like a museum after closing. Every room seemed already emptied. Not of people, but of intention. It felt prepared. The reinforced monitoring room behind them continued to hum softly through the smoke, its blue LED lights blinking in intervals that felt almost like Morse code. Someone had wired that room with knowledge and precision, someone who understood stealth aviation signatures, someone who knew exactly how to interfere with them. But the SEALs didn't have time to investigate it further. There was movement ahead, a distant soundless single footstep, barely audible, but too deliberate to be incidental or reverberated faintly down the corridor. Not a panicked scuffle, not someone running, not someone hiding, someone walking, slow, controlled. Mercer raised a closed fist, halting the team instantly. The air tightened as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. The corridor ahead forked into 2 branching hallways, each choked with dust, stirred up by the crash. The dim yellow lights flickered overhead, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the walls like fingers reaching for them. The commander whispered, though whispering felt unnecessary. Whoever was ahead of them wanted to be heard. "Stack." Slow and silent. The team stacked along the right wall, weapons raised, movements as smooth as blood flowing through veins. Advanced said boots, ghosting across the floor. The house grew narrower, the ceiling lower, the walls tightening like the throat of a tunnel leading deeper into the unknown. Then they saw it. A door at the end of the hallway. Closed. modern hinges, reinforced frame, just like the one hiding the monitoring station. But this one had a faint line of light shining beneath it. Not yellow, not white, blue. The color of screens. The commander nodded to Novak. Novak pressed his ear to the door, listening for vibrations. Instead, he pulled back slowly and whispered, "Sir, someone's talking in there." "Talking," Ortiz whispered. "Not to us," Novak said, "into a mic." The commander's heart slowed. That meant broadcasting. Someone was transmitting something. Data, voice, video. It didn't matter. Broadcasting from inside the compound meant broadcasting from inside the most sensitive, covert operation in decades. The commander signaled silently. 2 men positioned breaching charges. They counted down internally, and then the door opened by itself. Slowly, quietly, effortlessly, as if the person inside had been standing there, waiting. A figure emerged from the darkness of the room, not in a panic, not raising a weapon, not shouting, but walking out with a calm, steady posture of someone who had rehearsed this moment far longer than they had. The SEALs tightened their weapons, ready to fire, but something in the figure's movement made them hesitate. It was a man in his late 50s, unarmed, dressed in simple clothing, his hands raised, not high enough to signal surrender, but high enough to show he wasn't holding anything. But it wasn't the hands the commander focused on. It was the expression. No fear, no confusion, no surprise. He looked at the SEALs as if he had been expecting them for years. And then he spoke in perfect English. "I tried to warn you about the interference," he said calmly, his voice unshaken. "But you arrived early." The SEALs froze. Mercer stepped forward, weapon steady. "Who the hell are you?" The man tilted his head slightly, studying Mercer with unsettling curiosity. "Someone who has lived here long enough to understand patterns, long enough to know you were coming, and long enough to know they would sabotage you." "Who sabotaged us?" the commander demanded. The man gestured gently, almost apologetically, toward the monitoring room behind them. "Not me, but someone who knew this night was inevitable." "Answer the question," Mercer said sharply. "Who sabotaged the helicopter?" The man's smile was thin, almost sympathetic. Not everyone in this house wanted him alive. Not everyone in this city wanted him dead. Some simply wanted the world to see who came for him. The commander stepped closer. "You triggered the blackout?" "No." The man replied, "I didn't trigger anything. I only watched. The blackout and the surge came from outside the grid. You were being exposed by someone who wanted your presence undeniable." Mercer felt his stomach twist. Someone outside the compound. Someone with access. Someone with reach. The commander asked, "Why were you in that room?" "Why?" "The transmitter." The man exhaled slowly, like someone tired of holding a secret, because someone had to document the truth. Someone had to preserve evidence of the mistake. The world believes this operation went flawlessly, but you and I know that isn't true. "Why record it?" the commander asked. "For leverage," the man said simply. "Not for myself, but for whoever comes next." Mercer stepped forward until his rifle almost touched the man's chest. "And who exactly do you think comes next?" The man's eyes softened. "Whoever controls your 3 seconds." A long silence settled over the hallway, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the second helicopter descended toward the compound, unaware of the storm brewing in the dark. Inside, the team stared at a man who knew too much. Not about bin Laden, not about Al-Qaeda, but about them. The 3 seconds were not just a mistake. They were a message, and the man standing before them knew who sent it. The second helicopter settled into the courtyard with the soft, predatory grace of a machine designed for moments that will never appear in history books, its rotors cutting through the smoky night air as dust spiraled upward around the landing skids, and the reinforcement team disembarked with that crisp, silent coordination of men who had trained too long and too hard to ever hesitate. They had no idea that the quiet conversation happening just a few meters away had already shifted the meaning of the operation, bending its purpose into something far more complex than the simple objective the world would eventually celebrate. The SEALs surrounding the older man kept their rifles trained on him, each operator reading his posture, his tone, the strange calm in his eyes, as if weighing every syllable he spoke against the invisible threat unfolding in real time. The commander stepped closer, voice low, controlled, dangerously quiet as he demanded answers. Who warned the neighborhood? Who manipulated the grid? Who planted the device that interfered with their approach and sent a Stetovered helicopter tumbling into the courtyard? The man didn't flinch. If anything, his expression softened into something like relief, as though he had been waiting for years, maybe decades, for someone to finally ask the question they should have asked long before tonight. "I don't know their names," he said with that unnerving calm, only that they were not Pakistani, and not they were outsiders. Observers. They installed equipment months ago, long before you ever appeared on a radar. They watched the house, the city, the sky, and when your aircraft approached from the west too early, too fast, they triggered the surge. "To expose us," Mercer said, a bitterness hardening his words. "To expose someone," the man corrected quietly, "not necessarily you." The commander's jaw tightened as the implications nested inside each other like traps. "And what were you doing here? Why help them?" The man shook his head slowly. "I wasn't helping anyone. When they installed their equipment, they left me alive, not because I was a collaborator, but because they knew I understood what they needed. Not protection, but documentation." His eyes drifted toward the darkened monitoring room, its blue LEDs still blinking faintly. They wanted proof. Insurance, a record of the moment power shifted hands. The reinforcement team arrived behind them, boots thudding heavily on the floor as one operator leaned in and whispered urgently. They had found hard drives in a hidden safe room, upstairs Western hardware, government-grade encryption, nothing that belonged in this house or this country. The commander turned back to the older man with a new expression, colder, sharper. "Who were you transmitting to?" The answer came without hesitation. "No one. Not yet. The feed was programmed to relay to multiple endpoints the moment your helicopter crossed the wall." Mercer stepped forward, tension coiling in his shoulders. "Multiple where?" The man hesitated just for a second, but enough to reveal the weight of what he was about to say. "Heneba, London, and Dubai, and..." Langley, the hallway fell silent. "Langley," the commander's voice dropped to a whisper, "you are transmitting to the CIA." "To whoever answered," the man said softly. The file wasn't selective. The team exchanged glances, quick, subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone who hadn't served with them for years. Something had penetrated the sacred chain of secrecy around the mission. Something orchestrated not by declared enemies, but by the shadows that hovered at the edges of their supposed allies. A distant explosion shuddered through the walls, the breaching team upstairs clearing the last holdouts. The mission proceeded as history would later simplify it, but for the men in that narrow hallway, the operation had already fractured into two parallel realities. The public story that would be broadcast around the globe, and the private truth, dangerous and unwelcome, that would never be spoken aloud again. The commander lowered his rifle, a fraction barely noticeable, but enough to signal a shift. "You're coming with us." But the man only smiled, a sad, almost parental expression. "You can't take me." "Watch us," Mercer growled, stepping forward. The man's response wasn't defiance. It was certainty. "I don't mean you won't. I mean you can't. There are people who need me here, and people who need me gone. If I step onto your helicopter, they lose their insurance. They won't allow it." As if summoned by the weight of his words, the building shuddered again, not from a detonation, but from something moving across the rooftop. A drone, small and silent and absolutely not American, streaked across the courtyard, scanning for signals before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Mercer raised his weapon, but the commander gestured sharply for restraint. The man watched the ceiling as if listening to distant footsteps. "They're watching," he said softly, "and they'll keep watching until you leave." The commander exhaled, a decision hardening inside him. were extracting the data. All of it, he snapped toward Ortiz. Wipe the drives. Pull whatever you can. If you can't extract it, destroy it. Ortiz ran back toward the monitoring room, boots pounding against the marble. The commander faced the older man again. Where are the backups? The man's smile widened, a slow curve of resignation and irony. Everywhere, he said. This operation was never going to stay secret forever. Over the comms, a voice announced. Target secured, package complete. The world-changing shot had been fired. The objective accomplished. History had been written, but the SEALs standing there understood that something infinitely larger and more dangerous had been in motion beneath the surface of their mission. Mercer stepped forward until he could see the faint wrinkles around the man's eyes. If you're lying, I'll know. The man met his stare without blinking. If I were lying, he sighed softly, you wouldn't have crashed. The commander made the final call. We're leaving. Eyes on him until we're gone, but do not detain. Command decides the rest. But the man simply stepped backward into his room, as though he had known this ending from the beginning. Don't bother, he whispered. By the time your analysts review my face, I won't be here anymore. Mercer asked, where will you go? The man's smile sharpened. Exactly where you expect, he said, and exactly where you wish I wasn't. The SEALs withdrew down the hallway, weapons still trained, the door slowly closing behind them with the quiet, inevitable finality of something supernatural, as if the house itself had sealed the secret. Minutes later, with the compound burning behind them, the team exfiltrated into the dark. The helicopter lifted off, rotors slicing through the night with the same pulse that had awakened the witness on the balcony earlier, but this time, every man listened differently, hearing not just the machine, but the implications riding beneath its rhythm. Because the 3-second blackout wasn't a glitch. The surge wasn't an accident. The drone wasn't curiosity. The saboteur wasn't a victim. And the recording wasn't incidental. It was a message. A reminder. A warning. The commander looked out the open door as the compound shrank into the darkness below. That man, he murmured. Whoever he is, he wasn't watching bin Laden. Mercer nodded slowly, the dawn beginning to paint the horizon. He was watching us! And as they crossed the border back into the safety of silence, leaving Pakistan behind, they carried a truth that would never appear in their debriefings, never be mentioned in awards, never be acknowledged in official records. Some mistakes must be forgotten. Some truths must be erased. Some events must be buried deeper than the foundations of that compound, especially the truth of those 3 seconds to mistake. It wasn't a mistake, the exposure that wasn't an accident, the signal that wasn't meant for them, and somewhere else, in a city far from about the man who understood the interference, the blackout, the surge, and the meaning behind it all, stood quietly near a window, holding a new phone, waiting for the next helicopter he wasn't supposed to hear, waiting for the next mistake, because the world saw the mission that was broadcast, but the real operation, the one hidden in those 3 seconds, had only just begun.